Hey guys, welcome back to the AmBIssadors. This is part 2 of our discussion on bi activism and the London Bi Pandas, which was an activist group here in London, but has since disbanded. So in this part of the video, we're going to be talking a little bit about how that came to be and why endings aren't always a bad thing and aren't always even the end. So I'm Lo.
And I'm Vaneet, and we're joined by...
My name's Hunter, and I was part of the London Bi Pandas.
Cool, thank you so much.
So on that, I think the thing that set London Bi Pandas apart from like a lot of queer groups is just how involved they were in activism. I think a lot of queer groups, they do some element of that, but it's probably not to the extent that I feel like London Bi Pandas went to. You know, you were at the Fuck Boris protest, which is I think the first time I actually got to meet you all in person. There, you know, you made protests constantly about Boris and the government and against, like you started with fighting against BAE systems. Yeah, the battle job didn't go so well, but you know, and you've done stuff like having vigils for bisexual people, and I think that that's always been such a core element of London Bi Pandas. What would you say were the highlights of some of the stuff that London Bi Pandas got to do, got to achieve, got to protest against?
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely some moments that were pretty amazing. I think the most amazing thing that we did was the COVID-19 Hardship Fund. Like, that was phenomenal. I remember being in the meeting for that team who were going to take that project on. And we were going like, yeah, our aim is to raise like maybe $2,000, $3,000. We'll help like 10 people or as many people as we can with that money. And I don't know how, or I don't know where it happened, but it just snowballed into being this entire entity. And I think we raised like 22,000 pounds within the space of like 2 or 3 months. And we were just kind of shocked because also like London Bi Pandas is a community group. We're not registered anywhere. We're not a CIC. We're not a charity. We're not an NGO. We're not any of these things. So we're kind of using our own personal PayPal to facilitate this sort of stuff. And the poor person who had this extra 20 grand in their account, from like, well, I guess you're gonna explain to HMRC how that's what that was. Good luck, buddy.
Wealth redistribution, right? That's your favorite phase.
So I think that was one of the most amazing things that we did because it was also one of the most challenging because I don't think we had been like there. I think there's a bit of a disconnect when it comes to activism. People really care about causes because they're about groups of people. When suddenly it becomes an individual, your investment is very different into whatever that is. And we were getting individual stories of people and why they needed money. And we were becoming basically like a financial resource for people in a way that, we didn't know what we were doing. We were just kind of winging it. And we were learning a lot along the way. But it became really hard, I think, on the team, especially people who had never been confronted with the realities of what it's like to be, for example, like a street homeless queer person of color, who's like so desperate for the financial assistance that they actively need because of all of the things that are happening with the government, with the massive amounts of unemployment, with industries collapsing and all these sort of things, that I think it was a huge shock for a lot of people who hadn't been confronted with this kind of stuff before. I was quite lucky in that when I was doing the domestic violence work that I was mentioning earlier, that I had been able to like process these stories and had some experience processing them, and also kind of trying to remain objective at the same time, so you can try and be as fair as possible, as transparent as possible, as neutral as possible when you're offering this help. Because I remember the last time that I was planning on buying a ticket to fly into Iraq so I could smuggle out a young woman into Kuwait and take her to an embassy. It didn't happen, but that was the level of my like involvement. So I learned very quickly that actually we also need to put ourselves first. So yes, the hardship fund was like, I think, one of the most exciting things that we've done. We actually inspired quite a few other hardship funds as well, which was really great to see. We released some resources of all of the learnings that we had because we were like, other people need to know about all of the trauma that we're going through and how to deal with it and how to process it, and all the tools that we're using and how to do this effectively. And I think one of the things that was really important when we're doing the hardship fund, and it's really challenging to do this, is to kind of go, we cannot equate people's needs to other people's needs. So if somebody's coming up to us and asking for money for like a laptop or a phone versus somebody coming to us and asking us money for groceries, we cannot be adjudicators in that decision of who needs that more, and choose to give it to somebody over somebody else. Because I kept having to repeat this throughout the thing. We're not adjudicators of people's needs. We're not judges here. We don't decide who needs something more than somebody else. And I think that message did set into the team quite quickly. But it's really challenging when somebody's like, I can't afford to eat food, and you just feel compelled to like try and help that person. So yeah, I think with everything that we've done, there've been lots of highlights, but those highlights definitely come with significant challenges, as is any kind of activism. Nothing looks as amazing as it does on a pink news article, you know. And I think, yeah, so the hardship fund was really quite phenomenal. And I think when we held the Biovisibility vigil for bisexual people who sort of within the asylum system and by migrants who are impacted by, for example, like the hostile environment quite disproportionately, because they often don't meet the criteria for LGBTQ asylum, and most of the bi cases get rejected because there's a complete lack of understanding in the government. And at the time, we're also trying to help a young bi person who was escaping Chechnya and Russia for reporting and trying to expose some of the crimes that were going on there. And we discovered at the vigil that Russian authorities had found him in Spain, and he had to flee, and nobody knew where he was and nobody had heard from him. And I think we're still in kind of a place where nobody's sort of heard from him in a little while, so we're unsure about what's happening there. But it was just this like really kind of painful moment of reality that sort of set in, that, you know, lots of people have these kind of, even though the stereotypes are really problematic and harmful, they're kind of romanticized in a way of like bi people being really greedy and having multiple relationships and being really hedonistic and having like a great time with life and like being like morally ambiguous and doing whatever the fuck they want. And actually, like, the reality isn't that. The reality is this bi person trying to seek help and was unable to do so because there's no understanding of bisexuality, and the fact that this person was also trying to like expose horrific crimes against LGBT people, and still continuing to not have that kind of recognized. I think that was really quite like a reality check in that moment. And there was this like one moment where one of the speakers was a journalist who'd been investigating this and who had direct contact with this person who came to speak. And he was so kind of torn and emotional in his speech as he sort of broke down. Every single person in the vigil just sort of went and hugged him together. Yeah. And it was just really, really beautiful, I think. Just this idea that like, here's 30 strangers who are coming just to hug you and hold you in that space and recognize that this is something that we can all understand and empathize with and maybe even have experience of. So I think that's maybe not a highlight, but something that felt so special to be able to have that moment, have that space for expression, because also like we don't talk about these things. There was that just one article, or maybe like 2 or 3 in that sort of series of articles about bi asylum seekers, and there's nothing else that I've ever read since then about that topic in kind of mainstream media or in queer media. There's definitely kind of bi activists who kind of work in that space, but no one's talking about it. And there was this kind of space that was held for us to be able to talk about an issue that impacts us so severely as bi people.
I've actually got a whole section dedicated to bi asylum seekers in my book, including like stuff with that journalist who was there. And like, oh my God, it's not just a British problem. It's like every country, Canada, America, Europe, like such an issue that this stereotype that bi people don't exist or can like just pretend to be straight is just like affected by asylum seekers all around the world. So that vigil was really important. Like I remember it really well.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. Like that vigil, like, I obviously knew that LGBTQ plus people had issues with asylum, but I didn't realize just how it would disproportionately affect bisexual people. Like, the gathering was really special, but it was so heartbreaking at the same time to sort of hear these stories and to hear how difficult it can be. And it really opened my eyes a lot as well, to the point where, like, I think I even asked you if I could take that picture, because now every time I do any sort of slides at any talk, wherever I go, I always put that picture in, and I'm like, this is something we need to talk about. Like, if we're talking about bi people and if we're talking about us of color, of which I both am, obviously I live in the UK, so I have that level of privilege. But when we talk about intersectionality, that's a key thing, because it's the disproportionately affects bi people, but also people of color, and so bi people of color more than any other group, because you're more likely to get asylum seeker cases from places like Asia and the Middle East. So it's like incredibly important to talk about, doesn't get enough airtime. So yeah, I think that was a really special moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. The other kind of work that we've been doing around trans rights have been really powerful as well. We had a really kind of charged protest in response to the LGBT Alliance being set up in Soho Square. And it was so, like, I think it was so incredible in like this middle of this like wintry day, full of like rain and horrible weather, to see I think maybe like 130 or 150 people show up to have a conversation together, to kind of hold space for each other. And yeah, I think that kind of like, we had some really amazing speakers kind of speak at that protest. The fact that we were able to do it within like the space of a week to organize this thing was quite great. And it sort of showed like how, I don't want to, it's such a corporate word, isn't it, how agile we are. But I think, yeah, it kind of like really sort of demonstrated like how reactive we were as a group to be able to sort of set that up and have those kind of conversations and hold that space, and give people an opportunity to express their like sort of hurt and their anger, and like kind of like discontent with that group, which is so horrifying. And that was really kind of quite a special moment for like sort of trans rights, when we sort of had that protest, and the kind of work that we've done around it as well, like the sort of transphobia campaign that we sort of had, which contains like different things that we're trying to do, including the sort of 50 ways to leave your TERFA campaign, as a Simon and Garfield pun. I don't know why we decided on that, but it's sorry, a Paul Simon pun. Yeah, I think just a Paul Simon pun. The song is 50 ways to leave your lover, and 50 ways to leave your TERFA. I don't think anybody got it. I think I'm just an old geriatric here, kind of going, yes, Simon and Garfunkel, ooh. Yeah, all of these young bisexuals are like, oh, cool, 50. I sort of get it. But no.
I didn't get that at all, honestly. Thank you for informing me why.
I think, yeah, we did quite a lot of work to put that together, but we only were able to get out 30 of the 50 before Pandas closed down. But I think those 30 are still quite important, and I keep seeing them sort of popping up. And I think the kind of resources that we built into the website have been a huge highlight, which I was never sort of expecting us to do, to become a resource hub, to be able to create all of these kind of tools for other people to be able to use. And that was quite exciting, because obviously the pandemic happened and we were unable to physically go and do things. So translating our activism into kind of a new space was kind of quite like a huge step and a huge undertaking. And seeing the results of it, like we did the Queers Against Racism open letter pledge, and we had, I think, over 100 LGBT organizations across the UK sign it, and that was super exciting to see that kind of level of engagement with something that we were sort of pushing for. Because obviously, like when we're talking about some of these topics, we're talking about them in a significantly kind of more radical and progressive way than I think some of the other organizations, because we're all like, abolish the police, fuck cops, and slightly more controversial things. Whereas some people are still around the lens of like, there's some good cops, but maybe we should invest more in healthcare services and youth services, and they're not there yet. But to be able to be a group that's all like, fuck cops, sign this thing, and have engagement from like I understand that like being LGBTQ is quite like a radical political experience to be in, but it also involves a fair amount of like kind of privilege and opportunity to be apolitical. And so seeing like kind of apolitical LGBT organizations signing up and signing to this pledge against racism and to be like actively anti-racist was quite exciting.
So I guess then we should talk a bit about why LBP came to a close.
So why we closed down. Yeah, I think that's it was a while coming, to be honest. It was a really long discussion before we finally announced the decision. But mostly, I think over the last 12 months, we were noticing an influx of white bodies into the space. And as more white people joined the space, they invited more white people to join the space. And it meant that like quite a lot of the time that we could be spending on activism, we were spending on managing white feelings, we were spending on managing or educating white people, we're just spending on white people and their needs, and we're making space more and more and more for what white ambition looks like. And at some point, also from a personal level, you know, all of this activism was taking quite a significant toll on my health. All of this activism was really kind of impacting my life in a really negative way. Like I've for about the last 2 years, I've been describing activism as my primary partner, and that is unhealthy, people. Like I know that now, but that's really unhealthy.
The other day said like activism is my only girlfriend now, and then my housemate was like, no, we're not going to do this.
Oh my god, no! Activism is quite like an abusive partner to have. I'm not gonna lie. It's selfish. It only thinks about itself. It doesn't put your needs or prioritizes your needs in any way. You know, I was going to my muggle job, I was doing activism, and I was sleeping. And that's not really a life. Like I had no balance left. I was working 40 to 50 hours a week in my muggle job, and then 20 to 30 to 20 to 40 hours a week on top of that on the Bi Pandas. And so yeah, I found like a huge impact of that on my health. I was so stressed all the time. Like I'm kind of in recovery mode now as a result, and will be for at least a year or maybe 2 years until I can kind of work out what the sort of molecular change in my body has happened from being so stressed and so constantly on and so working so much. And as all of these kind of costs were happening to me on a personal level, I was like, hang on, who's benefiting from my labor in this space? Who's actually, you know, benefiting from the fact that I'm helping to facilitate the space, or I'm helping to lead the space, or I'm helping to keep the space going? Who's benefiting from the education that I'm imparting? Who's benefiting from the projects that I'm doing? Who's benefiting from the training and from the upskilling? Who's benefiting from the mentoring, from the support? Who's actually benefiting? And the answer every single time was like white people. And I kept then thinking about the fact that white people were benefiting from my significant unpaid labor, and that didn't sit right with me. You know, I was just like, there are a lot of bi spaces run by like white bi people, and just because this is like a radical, like more woke space that white people are going to feel better about themselves, it's a space that makes them feel like they're alleviating their white guilt by participating in it. But also they're doing that passively. So the more labor that I was putting into the space, the more I was noticing that white people were only taking. Very few white people were putting back into the space. And as white people were taking, they were taking away opportunities from people of color and from other marginalized people to take from that space as well. And I found this trend over the last 12 months that more and more people of color who we had purported to prioritize at the beginning of this group were stepping away. They were becoming more disengaged. They were less likely to participate in any of the things that we were doing. And I didn't really know what to do about this. Like, how do I fix this? I don't want to ask people of color to do more labor, but white people are fucking useless. No offense, whiteys, but you are. They were like literally. I think we had 700 members to it, like at the end of the group, and I could name the white people out of that were actively contributing on one hand. And was any white person contributing at the level that I was? Was any white person giving 20 to 40 hours a week on this project? No. Were they giving like the odd hour here or there? But actually then I had to go and redo all of the things that they were doing because they were incompetent? Yes. It's being really disparaging of white people, but I was spending like a significant amount of labor like guiding white people and trying to mentor them and trying to get them to do better and to, you know, we ended up having a post that I was in the middle of the kind of Black Lives Matter movement, and like the kind of peak of it. There was a post in the Facebook group, and if you don't know much about the Bi Pandas, the Facebook group that we have is our main kind of community communications hub and resource. So we use that to talk to each other for a number of different reasons. But I think, yeah, that's our kind of main communication point. And there was a space held in the middle of this, which I found really problematic, for white people to express why they were feeling disengaged with the group. Yep, I had that as well. And it was a space held by another kind of white person in the leadership team who hadn't really sort of thought this through. And that's kind of part of the problem that I found, that I was helping, like sort of having to manage all of this sort of white entitlement to things, or the white savior complex, or the whiteness of everybody's response to something. But as this space was sort of held, white people were sort of talking about why they were disengaged with wanting to respond in the group. And I was sort of reading through that and trying really hard not to get angry. And I can say all of this stuff now because Pandas is over, so I can get on my like bitching spree about white people in that group. You know, they're all very well-meaning, and I think, and this is something that I've been challenged on before, is that I need to stop calling white people well-meaning as well, because no white supremacy like beneficiary is well-meaning. And I think that's a really important distinction here to make. But they were sort of talking about the fact that they didn't know how to utilize their skills. You know, some of them were like, I don't write articles, I'm a web designer, so that's the only thing I can do, and I don't know what space there is for that skill. And I was just like, hang on, like, babes, I'm not an activist cult leader. It just happened, you know. I went out and sought these things and did them, and if I got them wrong, I learned and I did them better next time. Like, no one's here to be your teacher, no one's here to be your guide. I'm not your parent. Like, I can't continue to hold your hand through everything while the world is burning and trans people of color are dying and being murdered. I can't sit here and teach you how to write a blog post. I'm really sorry, like I can't do that. And I think there was a lot of like kind of bi inferiority complexes of like, oh, I don't know how to participate in the space, I don't know how to be invited, I don't know how welcome I am, and I'm just like, I can't manage those feelings. I'm only here to manage those feelings for people of color who feel like they don't belong, and I want them to feel like they belong. But suddenly, in a group of like 700, you know, I haven't done a demographic survey, but at least like 600 of them were white, and that's no longer a space that's safe or safer for people of color to be a part of. That's a space that's been truly colonized by white people, by white bodies, and like the amount of energy it would take to decolonize that space would come at a great personal cost, and it's just not worth it to have another white dominant space, another space that continues to give that much of a platform to white people. And it was really kind of a sad realization that as a person of color as well to have, when I realized that in my kind of trying to lead this space and my also significant amount of labor that I was doing on activism, that this sort of crept up on me. And I was also trying to make lots of kind of, not necessarily excuses for it, but I sort of bought into the well-meaning white person trope. I was like, here are all of these people that say that they want to make change, and here are all of these people that say that they want to do something, and here are all of these people, like, you know, like, I don't want to talk about the trope of the good white person, but here are all of the good white people that are like trying to actively do something. Like, I don't want to alienate them, and I don't want to like, you know, make them feel bad, and I don't want to do whatever these things. And suddenly I found myself like, why am I thinking about white people so much? how have they taken over my life this much? And so, you know, I think at that point I was very much like, I would like the space to end. The next stage now is to assess whether the space should end, because the space is still currently being used by people of colour. And so began kind of like a consultation process with as many people of colour within the group that wanted to engage with this as possible. So we did a kind of semi-public call out within the group, asking people of colour if they wanted to input into an important panda decision, that they could contact us directly. And I also reached out directly to so many people and had really long, really hard and quite emotional and almost like quite painful conversations about how important this space for them. And I think there was only kind of like one person out of everyone that I spoke to that was like, I would, you know, losing this, I don't think we should lose the space. And so at that point I kind of went like, everybody else is no longer using the space. So actually we need to kind of, we need to end it because it's not benefiting everybody, benefiting, well, the people of color that it should be benefiting, you know. And so yeah, so oh my god, I think I went through like every cycle of grief, every emotion. I went through like acceptance and denial and anger and blah blah blah, like cycling through them as rapidly and over again, as the pandas were sort of coming to an end. And then we finally kind of, I was about to make the announcement and then I got banned from Facebook for saying white people are trash.
The irony of that, the irony.
So yeah, I think I had like another week on top of that, just like I was like itching to be like, all these people are asking me all of these questions. So yes, that was the kind of like the real reason Pandas closed down, was it was a space that was colonized. And we sort of talk about dismantling white supremacy. That's the kind of crux of it. Like, we can't fix white supremacy. We have to destroy it. We can't put a band-aid on it. We can't do all of this labor to fix it, to make it better. What we're doing is we're giving white supremacy the tools to adapt and continue to be white supremacy, the tools to adapt in all of these kind of new situations and scenarios. We have to destroy it. We have to break it apart. We have to resign. You know, there's a lot of like, in the kind of diversity and inclusion things in a professional context that I talk about, of like making space at the table. The table is bullshit. Take an axe to the fucking table. There should be no table. Why is there a table? So I think one of the key things around this whole idea of like inclusion and creating inclusive spaces is who's actually starting these spaces. You know, I was one person of color within a team of predominantly white people starting that space. I'm a light-skinned South Asian, you know. My experiences are still very different, and I have a significant amount of privilege as a result of that. So the foundation of this group was set in stone by a predominantly white group. You know, as much as we had all of these kind of guidelines and aims and goals of prioritizing marginalized people and different kind of marginalized intersectionalities, I think that just meant that we were creating the parameters from a predominantly white perspective of what that inclusion looks like. And that's assimilation. That isn't inclusion. That's asking people of color to assimilate to our group and the way that we work, and not really taking into account or being consulted by a varied group of people of color and their kind of stories and narratives and how we can work to make those inclusive. We just sort of assumed, because we were predominantly white coded, white presenting, well-meaning white group that's trying to, you know, we're here to listen to people of color, we're here to like we'll sit back and you guys tell us what to do, and we'll whatever, you know. And like all of the kind of things that you hear white people say, like the well-meaning, good woke white person says, you know, thank you for your like labor of education, thank you for doing this, and you know, just tell me what you need and I'll try and make this happen, and don't worry, like I'm here in the background, I'm not going to try and take up space. But none of that matters, because whiteness is always pervasive and evident and prevalent. And as much as we want to try and act like that some whiteness, like some well-meaning white people who are dismantling their white supremacy and who are actively blah 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 blah, that's good enough, it's not. not in a white supremacist system. It's not good enough that some white people are dismantling their white supremacy and their anti-blackness and their racism. That's just not good enough. And if they're continuing to create spaces, and if they're continuing to occupy spaces, and if they're continuing to fill up these spaces, that's still white supremacy. And I think that was the crux of it, of like coming to terms with my own involvement in facilitating a white supremacist space, and deciding that that was no longer viable for me, and to see if that space was a necessity for other people of colour. And it turned out that most of them felt really uncomfortable about the fact that there was so much whiteness in the space, and that was enough for me to go, this space does not need to exist.
So now that London Bi Pandas has shut down, on a personal level, what is next for you?
I might take up pottery.
Do it.
No, so I'm gonna go into recovery, like on a really serious, significant way. I'm going to go to physical rehabilitation, because physically draining myself and pushing myself for Bi Pandas has meant that there has been a significant deterioration of my disability. It's meant that, previously I was able to walk for 20 minutes and not get tired, and now I can make 3 minutes. Like, that is the level of deterioration that's happened just in the last 18 months, where I've spent all of my time and all of my energy working on the Bi Pandas. Not a lot of people know this, but I ended up having such a severe kind of immunocompromised winter last year that I had tonsillitis 6 times in 6 months. And I was still using any shred of health that I had on the Bi Pandas. So I'll be kind of working on like how to improve my immune system and like general kind of healthcare things like that for a little bit. I'll be also shifting kind of my focus into like radical diversity and inclusion within my professional industry and context. So taking all of the activism learnings that I've had and applying it to my workplace and to my industry that I work in. And it's already having really positive kind of results. I've actually been appointed as a diversity and inclusion coach in addition to my role, which is really exciting. So I'll be using all of my energy to kind of focus on that and actually get paid to do the things that I've been doing. So as soon as the COVID-19 pay freeze ends, I should hopefully be remunerated. I'm having some really fascinating, wonderful, amazing conversations at work. Like, I had a conversation about one of the things that I want to do, is my ambition in terms of the diversity strategy that we've got is to value all labour equally in my workplace. So it's no longer enough that like somebody who works at like front of house at reception gets paid less than a researcher, because all labour is equal. It's not good enough that somebody who is a writer or an editor gets paid differently to a strategist or to whatever, because we're valuing kind of brain thinking more than physical labor or whatever it is. And trying to talk to my workplace about introducing like NHS style pay bands that are really transparent and open. And that's super radical, I think, for a workplace that sort of usually salaries are shrouded in mystery. So trying to like challenge that has been really exciting. I went around my like strategy team's office and I was like, guys, we should decolonize strategy. And just throwing that statement out there, and like and people just kind of went, yes, how do we do that? What do we do? How do we make that happen? And I was like, well, first of all, we need strategists of color in this room. But the fact that, like, in comparison to my last workplace, where I wasn't like properly out as trans yet, but I was sort of asking the workplace to respond to the GRA consultation when it was happening. And I was like, it's really important that we as a business and other businesses also respond to this, because we want to show up for trans employees, because all of this will impact us and our trans employees, as much as we kind of want to pretend that it might not. And they told me that there wasn't a business case for it. So I was like, well, you don't support trans people, so I don't want to work here anymore. And when I talked to my current workplace, one of the sort of final arms of our strategy is politicization. And that's super exciting for businesses to take a stand on. So I'm like taking all of my radical activism and applying it to kind of like a professional infrastructural context. And like part of my role is talking to businesses, so getting to have these conversations with other businesses as well is like super exciting. So that's kind of where I'm going to be at for the next couple of years, is radicalizing boring normies.
That's super exciting, because like corporates are so hard to challenge on that kind of thing, and to actually see them respond. Obviously, there'll be the discussion of like, do we have a float in Pride? And you go, no.
I'm like, is it authentic for you to have a float in Pride? Is it credible for you to have a float in Pride? Are you a long-term commitment to LGBTQ rights? And why do you want to float? Like, let's dismantle. Let's sit down here in this catch up and like dismantle. And let's set up a workshop later, and we'll get some post-its in to figure out whether you should be a Pride. The answer is no. I don't think any of us has talked about the whole of Bi Pandas as an entity in one go before, and I think that was like a really nice kind of opportunity to express the journey that we've been on as a group and as a community, and really kind of I think having like a perspective that isn't white on that has been great.
Yeah, I think it's been really wonderful to like actually hear about London Bi Pandas, because I saw so much about it, and I was involved in to a certain degree, but like obviously I had so much going on in my own life. So it's been really exciting, really interesting to just hear everything that you did. And you achieved a lot in such a short amount of time. So a lot to be proud of.
As like an activist, we worked so closely together with the Bi Survivors Network and Biovisibility. Like, it was such a good golden era of those organizations working together to like organize the LGBT protest and that kind of stuff. So I fully understand and like support, and like, yeah, it needed to, this needed to happen. But as an activist, as a bi activist, I'm like, we did some amazing things, and I hope that I can work with you in the future again on stuff like that.
I think there's definitely a lot of like quite significant grief in losing this community space, because it was so special to so many people, and it was I think one of the first places that a lot of people felt like there were radical enough politics to get behind, that there was a predominantly like kind of non-white team, that there was this kind of aim to not have a white dominated space, even though that's what we ended up having, that we were challenging a lot of the views that people had, that we were being quite active in making sure that this space supported the most marginalized members of our community. And I think that there is a lot of grief in the loss of that. And I think there's a lot of kind of like deep rooted sadness, because the Bi Pandas was one of the key spaces where a lot of bi people felt like that they could be them, like all of themselves for the first time. Even from my perspective, like I met so many amazing people that I would never have met otherwise. But I think the main thing that I want to like try and remind myself is that like these spaces can be facilitated by anybody, and we can continue to create them. And I think it creates like a lot of pressure on the pandas itself to kind of say like, this is the group that meant everything, and it's like, well, it shouldn't. And it's really good that we ended, because we ended on a really great high. We ended on something that we all continue to love and care about. And that was one of the key reasons for also ending it, because I could see how white dominant it was becoming. And I could, there have been a lot of questions of like, why didn't you just leave it to a bunch of other people to continue the space? And I was like, well, I don't trust white people to uphold its legacy, and I don't want people of color to continue to do the labor of creating this space for white people. Like, it needs to end. And I think it's okay that things end. The pandas never started as something that was supposed to be permanent. We were just a response to a Facebook post, we like the group happened because I was hungover in a coach. There was no plan in place. We weren't a formalized structure. It's a space that feels particularly special because we're all kind of marginalized in some way, and it's important to remember that we weren't an organization that were actively supporting vulnerable people, that we're not an organization in any kind of real meaningful sense of the words. And despite that, we've been able to achieve quite a significant amount of things, and it just goes to show that anybody can do it. I didn't know what bi-activism was until I responded to that Facebook post, and look where I am now. And there's a lot of, I think, when we were sort of talking about the post earlier, where people are like, I don't know how to be invited into these spaces or invited into being an activist. And it's like, nobody invites you. You just go and do it. So if you feel like you have passion and you have like capability and you have time and you have all of this stuff to give to the things that you care about, go and support Black-led organizations, go and support organizations that by people of color, put that passion somewhere, and don't be disheartened by the loss of this amazing space. Go and support other amazing spaces that are just as radical and that do need your help and that do need support and that do need all of this significant white labor money and blah, blah, blah. Go and give it.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on.
Lovely note to end on.
Yeah. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for all the work that you've done for London Bi Pandas, and thanks for everything you achieved. And thank you everyone for watching.
Bye, guys.
Bye.